Hello, I am here. I'm at St. Peter's Catholic Church in Stevens Point, Wisconsin.
The distinguished guest speaker is a representative of the church, consecrated at 26 years of age, bishop at 38, archbishop and metropolitan of Krakow at 43, cardinal at 47. With this pace of promotion, one does not know when he will end.
Eminentissimum ac reverendissimum Dominum Karolum, Sancte Romane Ecclesiae, Cardinalem Wojtyla. Sia lodato Gesù Cristo. Sempre sia lodato.
And this is my distinct privilege, pleasure, and honor to introduce to you His Eminence Karol Cardinal Wojtyla, who will speak on the intellectual work in the Catholic Church in Poland. Cardinal, His Eminence Cardinal Karol Wojtyla.
To understand why Karol Cardinal Wojtyla visited central Wisconsin in August of 1976, that is 50 years ago, we have to look at the man who introduced JPII at the annual Polish lecture series. That man and the Polish history in Stevens Point and in the area around Stevens Point in Polonia really sets the stage for Karol Cardinal Wojtyla to visit central Wisconsin.
That part of the world passed through terrible crisis, when the dignity of man, of human being, collapsed and was submitted to the authority of state once, to the one nation which was considered as the highest value. And in the name of this nation, it was possible to massacre 2,500 priests in Poland in concentration camps during the Nazi occupation. Cardinal Wojtyla was on special lists of SS. They were looking for him. But at the same time, he passed through difficult experience, which also is foreign to you, namely that instead of a nation and of a state, a party has been placed as the highest value. And in the name of this party also, the human values are degraded and are stepped upon, and the human values also are submitted to the decisions which, of course, represent the same crisis.
Dr. Soroka and his wife Olenka moved to Stevens Point in 1963. The Sorokas were forced into exile by the communist government in Poland. In Philip Kowalski's book, In the Footsteps of a Saint, John Paul II's visit to Wisconsin, he writes, "It is not by choice that they left Poland. They were forced into exile by the communist government in Poland, and were threatened with imprisonment and even death. Back in Poland, both Waclav and Olenka were active members of the Polish armed resistance movement. They were members of the Home Army, which was an underground resistance movement during Nazi occupation. Olenka served in the Home Army in many different ways, which included the role of military courier, traveling by train or small motorcycle, passing along classified communications among resistance centers. During the same time, she participated in clandestine efforts to smuggle medications and other assistance to the Jewish inmates of the Majdanek concentration camps on the outskirts of Lublin. Both members of the Home Army, Waclav and Olenka, met amidst their clandestine activities and were married by the end of the war. After the Nazi occupation, the Soviet Union stepped in with an occupation of their own. This did not bode well for the Sorokas, who were quickly forced into exile because of their opposition to Russian forces during the war. They left Poland and escaped to Western Europe. In 1954, the Soroka family made a final trip to the United States and first settled in Bloomington, Indiana, where Dr. Soroka studied and worked at Indiana University, before finally coming to University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point in 1963. Stevens Point and the surrounding area has a very rich and dense Polish community. Polish immigrants first arrived in Portage County in 1857. They found ample opportunity for farming and for land and for off-season work in the local logging industry. And they sent great reviews back to Poland, which helped to inspire many other Polish families to also immigrate to the United States. In the township of Sharon, which is just outside of Stevens Point, the first family settled there in 1857. And by the 1870s, over 2,000 families were in the area. And that's just in Sharon. I don't have the exact number of how many Polish immigrants have moved to Stevens Point, but it is very densely Polish. And the Polish immigrants were, very proud of their Polish heritage. Schools taught Polish, and the community was very proud of their food and their culture and their Catholic faith as well. Missionary priests and religious sisters were even sent to Stevens Point to help serve the community here. However, over time, the love for the Polish culture dissipated. Schools no longer taught Polish, and people had moved more off of the farms and more into the Stevens Point city and became more enmeshed with other communities here in Stevens Point. By the 1960s, Philip writes in his book, "For most people, being Polish in Portage County meant you had a Polish last name and ate paski before Lent." It was a cultural thing that still held on to, but it wasn't very deep, and there wasn't a lot of zeal for their culture. So the Sorokas and others at the time saw this, and they set out to foster zeal and pride in their Polish culture. The annual lectures on Poland were started in 1968, and this is what brought our beloved Pope John Paul II to Wisconsin. He was here to give the keynote at that year's lecture series. The organizers of the annual lectures on Poland were very smart because they knew in 1976 that because of the International Eucharistic Congress being held in Philadelphia, that a large international community would be drawn to the United States and that there would be a large Polish delegation at the Congress, and they sought to bring a speaker from that Congress. Dr. Soroka initially reached out to Cardinal Stefan Wojtyla, blessed Cardinal Stefan Wojtyla, and asked that he would come and give the keynote. However, Cardinal Stefan declined the invite, and he recommended that Dr. Soroka invite Cardinal Wojtyla. And then Dr. Soroka invited Cardinal Wojtyla, and he accepted the invitation. There were many obstacles in the way of getting JPII here to central Wisconsin, and they weren't all resolved until August 15th, 1976. That is just 8 days before the lecture series. But in God's good providence, it all worked out. And on August 23rd, 1976, Cardinal Karol Wojtyla arrived in Stevens Point at the Stevens Point airport. And he had a full day packed of events. He visited a farm in Rochalt, visited Felician Sisters in Polonia, visited Catholic churches in Rochalt, in Polonia, in Stevens Point. He visited St. Peter's Catholic Church. He gave his lecture. He celebrated Mass in the high school gym here. He visited nursing homes. He had a full day worth of activities. I learned about JPII's visit to central Wisconsin when I was in Holy Hill, Wisconsin. I was there on a little pilgrimage, and after Mass, a man had told me that that there were a number of saints that have visited Holy Hill and prayed there, and that JPII was among the saints. And I was so intrigued by that, but my conversation with this man was very short, and I left with so many more questions. Why was JP2 in Wisconsin before he was Pope? Like, what was he doing here? Was he on a fishing trip? Like, it just, the wheels were spinning, and so that was what got me interested in this topic. However, from reading Philip's book and some other resources, I have found it kind of hard to believe that Cardinal Wojtyla had time to visit Holy Hill. It's a 2-hour drive from here. He did have a jet, but I don't think he would have flown there. I guess I'm not so sure about that. However, I have a friend who was actually able to confirm for me that JP2 did visit Holy Hill. So I have more questions there. God willing, perhaps that is something I will share in a future video. Also, I hope to share more about my personal trips here to Stevens Point. I've been here several times over the last year and a half. I certainly have found a lot of gems, and a lot of gems that speak to me personally, and so perhaps that will come in a future video. But until then, and in the words of our beloved saint, let us not be afraid. St. John Paul II, pray for us.